We are so far removed from the idea of America and its minarchism written in the United States Constitution, where we have to bring her back to where she belongs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. Libertarians and fellow conservative light, as I like to call some of you conservatives, because you're that close. You're that close to being a libertarian. You're that close, and I hope you find it in your heart to see the state in itself as being a harmful nuisance in our current society. And you decide to let all straps and bondage go of the state and join us on the dark side. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to The Moral Compass, why the minimal state is the only ethical state. I am your host, your chief minarchist, Roderick Threeds. Before we get started, make sure you're liking and subscribing and you're vibing in the chat. Make sure you share this too, because we got the things, right? We got the things going on over here. The fight for this country has to stand the test of liberty. And we must use liberty for the quiver, the bow and arrow, for what it is. Because liberty is like conviction. When you shoot that arrow in that man's heart, he has no choice but to submit and tell you that liberty is king, or we use the Christian principle, Christ is king. Liberty is king. Liberty will always be king. It will always be dominion over man, because that is the only ethical place that all men are created equally, is in liberty. Nothing else. The state cannot create freedom, because the freedom they create is actual oppression, right? They try to give you positive rights. Rights are not positive. It's literally an antithesis. Rights are negative, right? They're negative rights. Negative. There's no such thing as a positive right. Only thing a positive right tells you to do is that the government says you have a right to do this. But remember, that positive right they gave you can be taken away by the same statute. So is it really a right? Because a right based on man is not a right, it's a privilege. I want you to remember that anything they put into statute is a privilege, aka driver's license. That's a privilege. You have a right to travel, but you don't have a right to drive a vehicle, especially when the state owns the roads. You don't have that right, do you? Right? You don't have a right to drive. You have a right to travel. Immunity and privileges clause in the United States Constitution, right? Need I remind y'all that the state has gotten bigger than its britches. The state has taught us, the people, quote unquote, majority of us, that the state must grant everything that you do. They have to micromanage your life. I mean, imagine coming out of the womb, actually in the womb, while you're in the room running around as a little tycho, you're doing backflips and all kinds of stuff in the womb, right? Your mother's dictating your diet, isn't she? Hmm? Your mom is dictating your diet. When you come out of the vajayjay or out of the C-section, your mama and daddy is dictating your life, right? They're dictating your life. You don't get liberty at home in that context. Your parents have the liberty to govern you the way they wish, less of neglect and abuse, right? You under control of your parents. And you would think about this a minute, right? 18 years of your life, your parents told you when to go to sleep, when to eat, when to go outside, when to come back inside, only to turn 19 years old, run away from your house and look, because your dad, mom, and daddy ain't got no, I'm grown, and only to look the state in its face, and it's telling you what to do if you can and cannot stay out late, aka curfews. If you can or cannot buy a firearm, age 18 for rifles, 21 for handguns, right? Oh man, the government even tells you that I don't care where you are. If I feel like it, I can make you strip butt ass naked on the side of this road because under the reasonable articulate suspicion that you're carrying drugs in your butthole. They find a way to strip your liberty so you go from one dictatorship to suck the dick of the other dictatorship, right? And that dictatorship that's telling you to strip your clothes down shouldn't even be doing that, but you're allowing them because you're getting on your knees and sucking the dick. You're allowing them to do it to you. I want y'all to really think about that a second. How in the hell you're gonna get mad because your parents are dictators that don't let you do shit, but you don't have the same energy for the state that tells you the same exact bullshit? And y'all don't tell me this is different, right? Right, that's different. No, it ain't. No, it ain't. When you at home, you live in a dictatorship and a communist regime at your home, don't you? Huh? There's only one party, and those are the parents, and they telling you what to do. They even tell you if you want extra money, you got to go wash some dishes, take out some garbage, clean your room, straighten your bed up. That gets a little bit of scratch in your pocket. Don't the state tell you the same thing? But see, here's the quirk, though. Right, here's the quirk. The state tells you look, you gotta get a job so you can live out here in the streets. Then they tell you, bitch, pay me. Mm. Bitch, pay me. You working, you pay me to work in my economy. You pay me. You ain't fighting that, is you? Because state got you to get, oh, my taxes go to great causes. Well, that money your parents gave you didn't go to good causes. I know a lot of parents made their children pay rent off their allowance they made. Huh? Talk to me now. Chat. Tell me if I'm lying, chat. Tell me if I'm lying. I just want to find out how these young kids go from one dictatorship, right? And yes, granted, let's still make the comparison. Your parents at home might put you in timeout, right? When I was growing up, your parents whooped your ass with belt. You got that leather strap across that ass if you screwed up, talked wrong, whole 9 yards. You were mad that your parents spanked you. You went to school. You went to the state to tell them that your parents abused you. When it wasn't abuse, it was discipline. And what does the state do? The state takes you away from your parents because the state has the monopoly on the violence. They say, no, parent, you can't spank your child, but we can spank them. But I want you 18, 19 to understand something, right? You better wish those parents whooped your ass into being right. Right. Because look, I'm telling you, and I'm gonna go there a second. My so-called melanated folks, y'all call yourself Black African American. I need you to listen to me here. Y'all went to school and told your school that your parents is abusing you. They spanking you, they whooping you, all this, that, and the third, right? And the state come to the house, and what they do? They take you away from your mom and daddy. Now you crying. You can't cry because you snitched. You told on your parents that they were abusing you when they were disciplining you. Now you're a ward of the state. Now your parents in jail, right? Your parents in jail now. They got to fight to get you out. Now you've created resentment towards your parents because of something you did. Now that you back home and now you done ran back in these streets again, 16, 17 years old, you done run in with the law again, but instead your parents whipped your ass at home to keep you on the straight and narrow. Them police putting a bullet in your ass because you acting a damn fool. Y'all listen to me now. Don't discredit what we talking about here. You done snitched on your parents because they whooped your ass, and you done went out here in these streets because you defied your parents, thought you was big and bad and grown, and caught a bullet because you was unruly the same way you was at home. Them police and them sheriffs don't give a fuck about you. If you out of line and you doing something threatening, they're gonna pop your ass. Now you can't cry about it. All you people out here got Pookie on your t-shirt, take that t-shirt off. Because when mama and daddy need backup at home to help discipline their child, because they say it takes a village, right? It takes a village, right? The state took the liberty of the parents to discipline their children at home, only to get them out in the street and get them killed. But y'all weren't there to help them. Y'all just want to say, oh, the parents should have raised them better. No, because the state took the discipline out of the home. Where is the liberty in that? We have lost a family and we've lost a child because the state's monopoly on violence killed that person. You better understand what I'm saying. Why y'all jumping up and down for all this? But y'all still want to get out here as grown people and ask for the government to govern your life when you've been under dictatorship for 18 years of your parents. But now you have to comply with the state because, again, they'll put a bullet in your ass if you don't comply. Rather, you caught an ass whooping at home and you bitched about the ass whooping. Now you catching bullets. But y'all won't get that. Yeah, y'all won't get that. Because you too busy worried about yourself and complying with the state. Life is going to pass you by. You're going to lose everything you got. You lose your freedom, there is no liberty. Because they took that with it. And you'll be on their knees begging them to give it back to you. And they don't want to give it back to you. Because now you're a controlled resource. But y'all go and get on out here. Y'all get on out here and throw away your liberty. Talk bad about your parents. And I'll see you on a mugshot in someone's sheriff's office. Because you decided to get on the knees of the state and you couldn't comply because the demands were too high because you didn't understand what was going on. Because you didn't listen to your parents on how to self-govern yourself. Because at the end of the day, people, please understand that dictatorship you lived under at that house was teaching you self-governance. It taught you how to govern yourself, your emotions, how you moved, how you made money, whole 9 yards. That dictatorship taught you how to self-govern, only to throw it away because you got mad at your parents and to look at the state in the face and don't know what to do because you don't know how to govern yourself. You don't know how to follow laws or local ordinances. Huh? No regard for life. You're willing to take away someone else's liberty for your happiness because you didn't listen to your parents and the state put pressure on you. Hmm? This is where self-ownership, what we're talking about today, the self-ownership doctrine, the body, the mind, and life. This is why this topic is very important. Remember, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure you do that right now. Because as we move into this, we remember we've established the foundation of our ethical case, right? Individual rights as unviolable constraints, okay? And the non aggression principle, which condemns the initiation of force. Today, we're going to dive into the core philosophical axiom that underpins all liberty, the self ownership doctrine. All right. Now, if the NAP tells us what we can't do to others, okay, self ownership tells us that we can do with ourselves. I'm going to repeat that again, going back and remember the story I just kind of just lined you up on, right? Self ownership tells us what we can do with ourselves. Now, we will argue that this moral cornerstone condemns virtually all forms of state control over nonviolent, personal, and economic conduct, reducing the state's ethical domain to a minarchist state, right? Now, as we get into this, I want to make sure people understand the nuances of self-ownership a second, okay? Because there's a distinction between ownership and control, okay? And this is the first nuance bullet point I have, right? Self-ownership is often misinterpreted as absolute moral control over one's body and mind. But the nuance is that it only implies moral ownership, right? The right to exclude others, not physical or financial guarantee, right? Because from my viewpoint as a minarchist, right, the moral exclusion piece, right, self ownership in this context means no one else, including the state, can use your body without your consent, and it does not guarantee that your body will be healthy, nor does it imply a right to state funded health care. Your right to self ownership does not impose a positive obligation on others to sustain you, right? Let me give you kind of an example of that, right? We're all against socialized medicine, right? Now, under the current system here in the US, right, Medicaid, Medicare, okay, asserts an obligation on taxpayers to fund health care for others, right? Self ownership dictates that while you are free to seek medical help, you have no moral right to compel someone else to pay for it. I hope you got the gist of that, right? Another nuance of self ownership is the condemnation of paternalism. All right, because if you're going to own your mind, body, and life, right, you don't want paternalism, right? And paternalism, right, is the state's effort to limit your liberty for your own good, aka let's bring up abortion. Let's think about that a second, right? Let's bring up abortion while we're here, because it encompasses both of these points, right? If we go back to the moral exclusion, right, which means no one else, including the state, can use your body without your consent, right? That's what statutes will do, right? In the abortion case, for or against abortion, that's what it will do on the surface, right? Paternalism, right? The state's effort to limit your liberty for your own good. So they're telling you what's good for you. You hear this all the time. Oh, a third party vote is a waste of time, a waste of vote, and against your best interest, right? You hear that all the time, right? This is paternalism. They're tell you, they trying to tell you what's for your own good. And then the same thing with the abortion case. In abortion, I mean, you can apply it. I don't have to explain it. You can apply it, right? Because remember, paternalism claims that partial state ownership over your autonomy is a good thing. Again, right? Abortion law, for or against partial state ownership of your autonomy, right? And just think about this. When the state forces you to act for your own benefit, it treats you as property, whether it be a child or a ward of the state, rather than a sovereign moral agent. See how that plays in? See, this is exactly why, right? As a minarchist, I vehemently reject laws governing nonviolent personal risk. Okay. For example, right here in Florida, we have laws dictating that adults should wear motorcycle helmets or seatbelts. Right? They're morally objectionable, right? But I will tell you on the opposite that the state should not deploy such coercive force to prevent an individual from assuming risk to their own property, which is their body and their vehicle, as long as they're not aggressing against others, right? The third part of this nuance, okay, is the labor theory or the property rights link, right? Because self ownership also extends directly to property rights through the axiom that you own your labor, right? For example, if you own your body, you own the physical energy and time produced by that body, aka labor, right? Therefore, the extended property acquired through the non-coercive mixing of your labor, I can't speak, with unowned resources or through voluntary exchange becomes morally yours, right? Now, let's apply this in the real world so people get grasp the understanding, right? The link between the moral foundation, right, for the argument that taxation for redistribution is theft, okay? When the current US government takes a percentage of your income for taxes and dedicates it to foreign aid or an art subsidy, it is morally asserting a prior claim over a portion of your life's labor, the time you spent working to earn that money. Right. And I always argue that the state only has a limited retaliatory claim, but no initiatory claim on your labor for social welfare goals. Number 4 of the nuances of self ownership. Now I call this this is where we start talking about transfer and abandonment, right? And specifically the right to transfer, right? Now, if you own your property, you have the moral right to transfer or exchange it voluntarily. Okay. Now, when we talk about the ethically, right? This principle alone condemns laws that interfere with free contract, right? The current U.S. system includes minimum wage laws, right? Now, we know the minimum wage laws was well intended, but these laws are moral violations because they coercively prohibit two parties, an employer willing to buy labor at X amount of dollars and a worker willing to sell labor at X amount of dollars, from entering into a mutually beneficial, non fraudulent contract, right? Self ownership demands the state respect their autonomy to contract freely. Now, let's add in the non-aggression axiom into this mix a second, right? Because this right is only limited by the NAP, right? So in other words, you can't sell yourself into literal perpetual slavery because the future self cannot be constrained by the past self's agreements, right? Which is we would call a contract voidable on demand, okay? You also cannot sell a product knowing it will cause harm because that is fraud, right? And this is why the minimal states courts must enforce non-fraudulent contracts. Now, the fifth and last nuance of self-ownership is the problem of abandonment, right? Because the right to abandon ownership has implications for liability, okay? So, for example, if you were to let's just talk about liability portion first before I get into an example because I'll probably confuse you, right? If you abandon ownership of an item, right? The moral liability for that item is transferred to the person who acquires it. So if you simply abandon ownership of, say, a toxic substance onto property you don't own, right? Let's say pollution in a river, etc. That is a direct initiational force against the property rights of everyone downstream. Now let's apply this in kind of real time, real world application, so you get a full understanding, right? Though now I'm gonna make this clear first. Though Minarchy doesn't impose environmental protections on ethical grounds, okay? In fact, it strictly mandates it, right? The pollution of a stream or air is viewed not as a regulatory issue, but as an act of trespass and a property rights violation against downstream owners in this case, right? The minimal state courts are ethically obliged to use retaliatory force, whether it be fines, injunctions, things of that nature, to prevent and rectify such aggression, right? And this is one of the things I'd love to teach the eco Nazis and the eco freaks, because if we can get to this principle, I think everybody would be on board instead of getting the big bad state to create mandates on environmental and pushing, green energy and all that stuff. We could just get to that. Everything else, everything else would flow properly, right? But anyway, those are the nuances, okay, of self ownership. And now, as we go through the rest of this, you'll understand a little bit more when we're talking about the self ownership doctrine, right? So when we're defining self ownership and autonomy, right, we have to talk about the axioms of control, right? So after I gave you the nuance of all that, I'm just going to make the self ownership doctrine very simple for you, right? Every individual morally owns their body, their mind, and their life, and the fruits of their labor. Okay? This means you have exclusive moral right to control your own person without external interference, provided you respect the same right in others, right? This particular thing is under the axiom of control called the autonomy principle. Okay? Now, the ethical implications of self ownership are profound because they prohibit both slavery and partial slavery, right? The state violates ownership whenever they assert a partial claim over your person or your actions, right? Now, let's adjust this to our current system, right? The paternalism of the federal government, right? The current federal government routinely asserts partial ownership under the guise of paternalism, right? Here's a great example: mandatory savings. Programs like Social Security assert that the government has the right to compel you to save your own for your own retirement, even if you prefer to invest that money elsewhere, right? Say perhaps in Florida real estate, you may want to if you're interested in moving to Florida, or to spend it right now, right? This is a partial claim over your future labor and financial decisions, right? I mean, we can all agree at this point, right, that paternalism is morally objectionable because it treats the individual as property, right? Like a child that's incapable of making their own life choices, right? And is a direct violation of their adult autonomy, right? An ethical state must respect the right of an individual to be the sole decision maker, regardless of any other external force regarding their own well being. Goes back to the story I told at the beginning, right? I'm going to let that sit a minute. Now, the the most immediate and comprehensive ethical condemnation arising from self ownership is against laws pertaining to personal conduct where no external rights are violated, right? What specifically am I talking about? The immorality of victimless crimes, right? Because if your own self, if you own yourself, right, you own the right to make decisions about what you consume, how you manage your health, and what risk you take, provided, okay, these choices don't initiate force against a non-consenting third party, right? I want to use let's use let's use personal consumption, right, as one of our real world examples under this, right? And let's take laws, right, criminalizing the consumption of recreational drugs or prohibiting the sale of certain dietary supplements are immoral under self ownership, right? Since the consumer is willing to ingest the substance, the state's use of force to prevent that action is an initiation of force against the non aggressor's autonomy, right? I think most of us that understands this concept reject the war on drugs, right? As a massive ongoing ethical violation of self ownership, right? Let me give you another example, and this one's will be surrounding like personal risk, for example, right? See, and if we look at the laws that are mandating the use of seatbelts or motorcycle helmets, are like paternalistic, or they. Let me state this right. They are paternalistic and immoral. If an adult chooses to accept the risk of injury or death to their own body, the state has no ethical authority to interfere, right? This simply this is this is simple property rights. Your body is your property. The state must respect your use of it. All right. The self ownership doctrine extends logically to the means by which you sustain your life, your right to economic liberty, right? And condemns expansive economic control. Okay. If your let's put this out there. If your labor is your property. You own it, right? You have the right to exchange that labor freely. The state cannot morally dictate the terms of a non fraudulent voluntary exchange. Again, let's talk about minimum wage since we hit that earlier, right? Minimum wage laws are often justified as an ethical way to ensure a living wage. I know you've heard that before, right? Living wage, right? Right. However, with these people again that are about a living wage, don't understand that they violate the self ownership of both the worker and the employer by coercively dictating the terms of their voluntary contract. If a worker is willing to sell their labor at $10 an hour and an employee is willing to buy it for $10 an hour, the state's use of force, where it be business closure, fines, etc., to stop that exchange is an immoral act of aggression against a free contract. Right? Let's use another one, right? Let's go back to COVID a second, right? And all the people that lost their occupational licensing because of COVID, because they opened their business, etc., right? Because our current system, right, requires licenses, right, for hundreds of jobs from hair braiding to tour guiding, right? And this limits my right to use my own skills and labor unless I pay the state, take mandatory classes, and require a permit, right? This is an assertion of partial state ownership over my labor. The state demands a toll before I can use my own property to sustain myself, right? All unnecessary licensing requirements are immoral constraints on individual liberty. Period. There's no way around that. But I'm going to roll with this a second, right? And we're going to roll out here in a second. And I just want to just add some more to this, right? The self ownership doctrine is the most powerful moral constraint on state power. It establishes that the individual is sovereign over their own life and body, and any state action that involves coercively controlling what a non aggressor does with their time, their body, or their voluntary acquired property is a moral assault on their autonomy. Therefore, a minimal state is the only ethical, permissible government because it respects the individual as a sovereign moral agent. It stands as a night watchman enforcing the non-aggression axiom so that every person may exercise full ownership over their body, mind, and life. Now, as we wrap this through, I want to throw one more thing in here, right? Because about the self ownership doctrine, right? Self ownership, as I mentioned, right, serves as the bedrock for two main moral arguments. And I want y'all to remember these as your days go along, and even look into them, right? Or even bookmark or timestamp this part of the video so you can go back and remember what the words I said, right? The self ownership doctrine serves as the bedrock of the two main moral arguments of life and autonomy, and it's the negative injunction and the positive claim. That's exactly what it's about. Next Sunday, we will turn to episode 5. And I think I've named it. Let me look. Yeah, I named it "Ethical Failures of the Maxi State: The Moral Corrosion of Power." We're going to explore how large government, by its very design, erodes personal responsibility and breeds moral hazard. Until then, remember, self-ownership is the right from which all other liberties flow. Remember, love your neighbors, love your family, but ultimately, love yourself. Because without that, you can't love anybody else. Until next time, y'all, peace and love.